interesting. Through the centuries, through the years. Michael.
Check. 1, 2, mic check. No.
This person's name is spelled incorrect. You might call it wrong. His name is Lachlan.
Lachlan, yeah, I have it on my script. So basically, it's scripted.
So what you have here is Lofton, but his name is Loughglin.
Lachlan.
audience who is viewing online, I also extend the invitation to join us in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you, dear God, for bringing us all here safely this morning to take part in our very first inaugural World Poetry Day session. Father God, I bring all the glory and the honor and the praise to you, dear God, for you gave us traveling mercy this morning. You woke us up, dear God, and you put the breath of life in us. So Lord, I ask that as we proceed with this program, that it will bring joy, it will bring honor to someone, it will glorify you somehow, dear God, because without you, we cannot do anything. So Lord, I ask that you will continue to guide and be with our participants, dear God. Take fear out of them and replace it with bravery. And I pray, dear God, that at the end of this session, all of us will be truly blessed and we can truly say that it was indeed good to be here. For this is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. This time we will invite Miss Leah Liber to the opening remarks.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Good morning, all again. Could you please put your phones on silent? That was just made by the cameraman. So, my role here today is to present some very brief remarks. We at the Teachers Resource Center, first, let me apologize, I'd like to acknowledge Mrs. Warner, our representative for UNESCO, and I'd like to also highlight Mrs. Edmead, who is our coordinator, director for CDU TRC, and our coordinator for TRC, Ms. Ruth Bedford. So as I continue, we at the Teachers Resource Center thought the culture of poetry in the school was losing its presence. Our staff is expected to provide support to teachers in St. Kitts and the Ministry of Education by extension. So, we thought it fitting to present this poetry session, especially considering that we've just celebrated World Poetry Day, March 21st to be exact. A variety of presentations surrounding poetry would be on display this morning. Different types of poems would be read or recited, and dialogue will be held to enlighten you, the invited. Hopefully, TRC's deliberate action would reignite poetry in our schools and in the lives of our children because it is far-reaching. It brings about creativity by the use of expression using words, or it might just create a form of employment. Whatever part you play in being present here, we hope it will certainly help us to achieve our goal from the TRC's perspective. Thank you for accepting our invitation. So, without any further ado, let's dig into our session, to our poetry session. Our next item will be via the host with Carla Berridge. Enjoy.
Welcome to our first episode of Let's Dig In. I'm Carla Berridge.
And I am Sandra Morton, reporting from our Poets Cocoon. We're extremely ecstatic to have you in our studio. You are the heartbeat of our show. Without your face in the place and your feet under the seat, our Let's Dig In will not be the success we want it to be today. To our online viewers, thank you for joining us. Today we further extend the celebration of World Poetry Day. Let's show appreciation to all our local, regional, and international poets who have helped to keep poetry alive over the years. We have a number of them with us today, and I'm certainly looking forward to listening to the beat of their words resonating in our ears.
Poets, thank you for gracing us with your presence. Mrs. Morton, I love poetry. I remember when I was in school, and I always absolutely loved poetry. I love the language, the expressions, the gestures. It forced us to think critically.
I love your sentiments. The rhythm, the tone, and the expressions are so compelling.
I'm told that UNESCO first adopted 21st of March as World Poetry Day in 1999.
Yes, the aim of that is to support linguistic diversity through poetry expression.
World Poetry Day is also an occasion to honor poets, revive the oral traditions of poetry recitals, and promote the reading, writing, and teaching of poetry.
The fact that UNESCO set aside an entire day to focus on this art form suggests its importance to our literary development. Guests, we have a very interesting program lineup for you today. We have some very talented personnel who have a wealth of experience in poetry. And I'm certain that by the end of this show, we will gain some more insights about poetry and develop a greater love for poetry and the art form.
And so our first guest today is Mrs. Dorothy Warner, and she is the Secretary General of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Commission for UNESCO. Help me to welcome Mrs. Warner. Mrs. Warner, welcome to Dig In. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Father.
I think you're the most fitting individual to tell us more about World Poetry Day. So tell us, what is the significance of World Poetry Day?
World Poetry Day, as you mentioned earlier, is an occasion to celebrate poets, to revive the oral traditions of poetry recitals, and to promote the reading, writing, and general engagement with poetry. But it also serves to foster a convergence between poetry and all the other arts, including theater, dance, music, painting, and as such to raise the awareness and the visibility of poetry in the media.
So the Director General of UNESCO prepares a message every year. What is the main focus of the message this year?
The focus of this year's message is the support of linguistic diversity in poetry. Poetry helps us to promote and spread teachings from different languages. The approach is to identify, archive, and preserve endangered languages and make more people aware of the treasured forms of cultural and linguistic poetic expressions. So this year we are celebrating languages, indigenous languages.
Wonderful. I want to invite you now to share the message with our audience.
Thank you, Paula. Message from Miss Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO for World Poetry Day. Arranged in words, colored with images, and struck with the right meter, the power of poetry has no equal. As an intimate form of expression that opens doors to others, poetry enriches the dialogue that catalyzes all human progress and is, more than ever, very necessary in these turbulent times. This is especially true for indigenous peoples, whose languages and cultures are increasingly under threat, in particular from industrial development, climate change, and conflict. For these communities, poetry plays an important role in maintaining linguistic and cultural diversity and preserving memory. The work of Joy Harjo, a member of the Muskogee Nation and Poet Laureate of the United States, shows this clearly. Her poem, Break My Heart, describes her return to Okfuskee, Alabama, where her ancestors were violently uprooted and forced west under the Indian Removal Act of 1830. As she states very powerfully, and I quote, "You cannot force poetry with a ruler or jail it to a desk. History will always find you and wrap you in its 1,000 arms." End of quote. On World Poetry Day, UNESCO shone the spotlight on indigenous poetry to celebrate its unique and powerful role in standing against marginalization and injustice, and in uniting cultures in a spirit of solidarity. This day for the United Nations marks the start of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, led by UNESCO, to reaffirm the commitment of the international community to support indigenous peoples in preserving their cultures, knowledge, and rights. As part of our efforts to safeguard living traditions, UNESCO has included a number of poetic forms on the representative list of intangible heritage of humanity, such as the Hudhud chants of the Philippines, the Mapoyo oral traditions of Venezuela, the Eshuva Arakmbot song prayers of Peru, and the Kogea oral tradition of Uganda. Every form of poetry is unique, but reflects the universal nature of the human experience. That is, our aspiration for creativity that crosses all boundaries and borders. That is the power of poetry. From the National Commission for UNESCO, I wish to say thank you to the staff at the CDU for putting on this program. I am honored to have spent the earlier years of my career promoting the appreciation of poetry through the development of the language arts. I'm heartened that your passion for poetry has forced you to organize this event and showcase our local talents in creating and highlighting this celebrated art form. Thanks for partnering with UNESCO for keeping poetry alive. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Warner, for stopping by today. We now have a clearer perception of the significance of the day and also the importance of it. I now want to invite Mr. Peter Ketchum to share a poem.
Good morning, folks. It's a real pleasure, though I'm a bit flustered because I have another engagement. But I'm delighted to be here this morning. And appropriately, I'm going to do this piece, one of my favorite pieces, I Need Time. And this is an experiment with use of time, the repetitive use of the word time. And of course, I also experimented in form and style. And you would recognize the modern elements of rap, spoken word poetry as well. I need time. More time, extra time. I wish I had, if only I had the time. Time to do this, time to do that, time to do God knows what. I'm too busy with the hustle and the bustle because life is a struggle to survive. So I need time because my life is a rush hour traffic time. Time to meet that deadline on time. Time like the tides, ebbing and flowing. Time. that is elastic, so that I can stretch my day beyond the sunset. I don't have the time, so I need some quality time. Time to go out on a fun-filled Friday night and have a hell of a time. I need time. Time to be on time so that I could show up on time and not waste the time of those who took the time out to be on time. Yes, I need time, real time, precious time. Can I buy some of your time? Time that you're wasting wantonly. Some of your time that is running out like the grains of sand in an hourglass. Can I buy some of your time? Idle time, waste of time, passing time while you just sit and lime killing time. Can I buy some of that time? Time that you philander and squander on women and wine in search of a good time, as if there's no tomorrow, and you're living on borrowed time. Can I buy some of your time so that I can give it to those who value time and will spend the time using their time wisely? Can I buy some of your time so that I can measure and bottle it and make time available for those who always lament that they don't have time? Time to enjoy a breath of fresh air, a beautiful sunset painted on a picturesque landscape so that you can escape time momentarily stretching into an eternity. Slow, laid back, unhurried time. To enjoy time while you still have some time. Because life is not a football game with injury time or extra time. So when that final whistle blows anytime now, it will signal the end of my time. So can you spare me some time? Can I beg, borrow, barter, steal some of your time so that I can make up for lost time? Anybody knows the time? What time is it? Please, I need some time out. I'm running out of time. Oh God, my time is up. Thank you very much.
Mr. Pension, we know you are a giant in this field. That's the work of a giant. How has your active involvement in poetry over the years helped you to develop your art form?
I think first and foremost is being able to perform to an audience and to communicate a message. And I tell people that poetry, when I use the platform, this poetry platform, I feel like a god. I feel like a god. I feel like I'm ministering to people. I'm spreading the gospel to people, and that is the feeling. Like I'm creating. And actually, I'm a creator. Yes.
And we admire that in you. Can you give us any advice on other poets can function in society with poetry?
I think first and foremost you have to develop that passion, and you have to see things. I think we as poets we have a different eye to see beyond the mere observable reality, and to dig deeper into an idea, and I often refer to the creation of poetry as the creation of life. You visualize, you conceptualize, and you get an idea, a germ. You take that germ of that idea, you conceive it, you carry it sometimes for months, you become impregnated with all sorts of thoughts and clash and colliding of ideas and so on. And then, in the final analysis, you give birth to a bouncing, beautiful poem.
Thank you very much for stopping by and sharing your poem and sharing your thoughts, Mr. Benjamin.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Our next guest is Aisha who will share a poem with us. Teacher. Sorry. Our next poem.
I was trying to wait for you to give me the money.
I don't know how well I will follow my dear cousin, Mr. Pension, with that fabulous rendition of Time. That has always been one of my favorite pieces of his. But let's see if the blood runs deep. My poem this morning is called Not Black Enough. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. The Black National Anthem, sung across generations of Black people, it is a song of shared experience, resilience, and hope. And yet, even as the words roll off my tongue, I am plagued by words spoken to me repeatedly, words that can only arrive at this conclusion, sadly, that I am not black enough. I mean, when I wake at mornings, I often believe myself to be black. The eyes that blink the sleep away always catch a black woman looking back. As I purse thick lips and my nostrils flare wide, I never thought for one moment in time that I would look in the mirror and not a black woman I would find. You see, I know myself to be black, but often my knowledge feels more like a belief, and I could philosophize and quantify all the whys, but the truth is alarmingly brief. I am not black enough. I mean, I feel the indignation when our brothers and sisters are killed and mistreated because of their hue. I feel the shared trauma that is embedded in our DNA when I hear of slavery and lynching and white people saying, or being, well, white. And as I wait for a meal at my local establishment, and I still am made to feel less than I ought to, as my people still run like hamsters on the proverbial wheel, giving their energy to the cycle of they are better than us and we cannot survive unless we yield. And in all of this, I think myself black, aging with time and hopefully wisdom. As the grays peek out of kinky rooted locks growing down my back, and not even this evidence suffices, and I am often quietly reminded that I am not black enough. You see, I have an image of myself in my head, an image that caused me to stand in solidarity, even as an imaginary African king brought so many together in a fantasy that excited us and also made us think as we donned our gowns and we pledged to this land forever. I was reminded quite openly that among my friends and family, I did not belong in the picture opportunity. As I walk on the road, black power, earrings hanging, head wrapped as a crown befitting the empress that I am, only to be met with an unsolicited reprimand. It is a man who should be my protector, a man who should be my father, my brother, my keeper. Instead, his words are a reminder that I am not as black as I had imagined in my head. Rather, I am a woman of a different hue, a woman who is red. Moshe is what I was called as a child, and while all I wanted to do was play, my siblings in the beginning often ran away. They called me white, they called me yellow, they called me red, but none of that ever matched up to the image in my head. I was lighter, but nowhere near white. I bruised easier, but that didn't make them right. And at a desk in high school, learning about our plantation history, the assignment was to write as a slave during slavery. And regardless of the direction taken by my imagination, each story always had the same conclusion. With me either flogged or hanging dead, because my black self would surely rebel. And the more I grew was the more I knew that although my skin was the result of the actions of generations past, and the echoes of their travesties are for the generations more going to last, and we as a people will continue to bear the memories ingrained in our souls, that I am always going to be loud, proud, and bold, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you see. The conclusion of the matter is, I am created beautifully, and that is black enough for me.
Amazing, amazing. Mrs. Adams, how early did you develop a love for poetry?
Wow. Let's see. I was probably in primary school, probably grade 6. Yes, I think my writing skills really blossomed to an extent that I could say stuck from grade 6 onwards. Before that, it was just, learning to do stuff. But yeah, I think from grade 6, I used it as an outlet, because we often say that children feel things, to an extent more than older persons. Their emotions are felt 1,000-fold more, and as an adult looking back, I can say, yeah, that was true. I felt everything, but I couldn't say everything, so I wrote down everything.
Yes. And like that writing behind you, Robert Frost, you turn your emotions into words.
Yes.
And so it was your way of escape.
Yes.
All right. Can you tell us what inspired that love for poetry?
Exactly what I just said.
Oh my, I'm sorry that I repeated it.
Yes, I needed that outlet because I read a lot. I read a lot of books, and I had amazing teachers. Mr. Pemberton, Miss Blanchett,
Oh, wow.
Just being friends with you, Sandra. And, I see everybody and my colleagues, Miss Edney, and everybody, they're just being around persons who, they encourage and inspire. And I'm what you call a people watcher. And a lot of the times for me to describe persons, it's easier for me to describe persons poetically than to describe them straight. I think I get in less trouble when I do it poetically instead of straight.
Yes, yes.
It's less offensive
Yes,
it's all colorful
Yes.
and everything. Plus, the language of poetry fits into my plays a lot, and I use it that way because it gives an additional layer. But I didn't forget, Miss Archibald taught me in sixth form. Yes. I use poetry in my theatrical works because it adds an added layer of, complexity to the work. And some persons, even if they don't get the understanding of the words immediately, the very emotion of the words always hits its mark.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Adams, for sharing with us, student today. Back over to you, Carla, with Seventh-day Adventist Primary School.
I now want to invite some students who are here with us, the Seventh-day Adventist Primary School, to share a poem with us. Welcome them with me, please.
Be Yourself by Ellen Bailey. Why would you want to be someone else when you could be better by being yourself? Why pretend to be someone you are not when you have something they haven't got? Cheating yourself of the life you have to live deprives others of that only which you can give. You have much more to offer by being just you than walking around in someone else's shoes. Trying to live the life of another is a mistake. It is a masquerade, nothing more than a fake. Be yourself and let your qualities show through. Others will love you more for being just you. Remember that God loves you just as you are. To Him, you are already a bright shining star. Family and friends will love you more too if you spent more time practicing just being you.
That's good, that's good.
Another round of applause as they leave. That was thoroughly enjoyable. And now I want to invite another student, this time from the Dr. William Connor Primary School, to share a poem with us.
Go ahead. Go ahead. If I were a principal, boy, things would change. Our school would be fun and a little bit strange. We'll keep turtles in the classrooms as pets. We'll travel to Trinidad and learn to fly jets. We'll get to make movies and we'll become stars. For field trip, we'll blast off on rockets to Mars. We'll learn to raise strong minds and build time machines. We'll surf on tsunamis in slick submarines. We'll practice some potions and magical spells to clean up the schoolyard from sickening smells. To make us invincible and strong and tall, or turn into liquid, or walk through a wall. Yes, if I were principal, that's what we'd do. We'll lock evil scientists up in the zoo. We're vanquishing villains and capturing crooks. In other words, we would read many more books. Written by Ken Nesbitt.
Thank you to the students of the Seventh-day Adventist Primary School and the Dr. William Connor Primary School. Guess who our next guest is? Mr. Leroy Pemberton Jr. Help me to welcome Mr. Pemberton. Mr. Pemberton, welcome to Let's Dig In. You come here highly recommended by your colleagues, and thank you so much for choosing to be here with us.
Pleasure being here.
Mr. Pemberton is a senior lecturer in English at the Clarence Fitzroy Branch College since its inception, and he has taught both the Keon High School and the Bastyr High School. So, Mr. Pemberton, different persons have different definitions of the term poetry. App and Johnson, in Sound and Sense, say, it is a kind of language that says more and says it more intensely than does ordinary language. It says, poetry is language whose individual lines have a higher voltage than most language. It is language that grows frequently incandescent, giving off both heat and light. And William Wordsworth says, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, it takes its origin from emotions recollected in tranquility. Of these definitions, which definition sums it up best for you and why?
I think I rather like the first. But before I comment on that, maybe I should share another definition by Dr. Auden, who is himself a celebrated 20th century poet. Auden says that he is always interested in hearing what a poet has to say about the nature of poetry, but he doesn't take it too seriously. And I believe what he really means is that poetry is such a slippery idea, it's constantly changing over the years, that there is no one way of actually saying what it is. In fact, poetry is more easily recognized than described. Another writer says imaginative use of language, but I think I love that first one that speaks about the language of poetry that is incandescent. It glows, there is heat and there is light. When you listen to poetry, what should really happen is that it should send ideas popping off. It should illuminate you. You should share the experience. But not just have ideas popping in your head, it should stir your feelings, as it did this morning when we listened to those who were reciting. So I love that one. Teasing you out of thought, stirring your feelings.
Now we would notice with poetry that the language is sometimes different from the way persons speak regularly.
Oh yes.
Why do poets do this? Why do they use such deep, intense words and expressions?
Well, remember they want to share some experience. And if they use deep words, it's because they want it to be grooved into your mind. It should not only be pleasurable, but memorable. If you enjoy something, you want to keep that experience with you. Hence the use of that kind of language, which makes it both pleasurable and memorable.
These intense words, sometimes we like them and sometimes we don't, and this might cause persons to shy away from poetry because sometimes persons may not understand what exactly is being said. So can you share some tips that we can use to help us to unlock the meaning of poems?
If you let me preface that very quickly, perhaps it's shy away because a lot of persons don't understand what poetry is really.
Okay.
And it might be useful to mention that another poet himself, T.S. Eliot, says that poetry is a superior amusement. It's a kind of word game.
Okay.
So if you look at poetry as a game, it means that you have to be a willing player. And Jeff Rouini said, to enjoy poetry is to read it well. So here are some tips about how to do it. And if you let me, Miss Berridge, I believe in the KISS principle, keep it simply simple.
Yes.
So first of all, when you start reading poetry as a word game, try to understand what the poet is saying. What is happening in this poem? If, for example, you start with a word and you're not clear about it, look up the word, you're a willing player.
Okay.
The popular Guyanese poet wrote a poem called Poem, a straight sounding word. So if I'm playing the game and I want to understand, I check the word poem. It simply means an introduction. And then his first line said, not in the saying of it are you said. What does that mean? So I pause a while, make sure we understand what he's saying. Well, poem is an introduction. It means as you read the poem, you learn that he's talking about who you are. And really, if some of the words tend to confuse you, it's because you never really understand everything about yourself. So some people think that they must understand everything about the poet, when in fact the writer is trying to suggest to you that you cannot really understand everything, but it is still important to have a clear idea about what he is saying. And then secondly, you ought to take note of how he says what he's saying. If he uses short words or long words, you ought to pay attention to that. If he flips a sentence around, there has to be a reason for it. So if he says, for example, a cold coming I had, instead of I had a cold coming, it means that when I was coming home it was cold, but if he wants to emphasize that it was cold, he flips it around and put a cold coming I had, because that is the thing on his mind. So first of all, understand what he's saying, pay attention to how he's saying it, the words he uses, the images, those words that appeal to your senses, the sounds he uses, and also how the poet actually looks on the paper. That's the shade. That's part of the experience. So what he's saying, be clear about it, how he's saying it, and after you note how he's saying it, the last one is you ought to work out why. You ought to do some intelligent guesswork to work out why he's saying what he's saying, how he's saying it. And if it doesn't come all the time, you're playing a game. The more you play with the poet and his work, it's the more you come to understand it and the more you love it. It's like a love game.
Okay. All right, Mr. Pemberton, thank you so much for these tips, and I'm sure our audience, both here and online, will put this knowledge to use. I want you to stay with me. We'll chat a little bit more. But for now, we will have two of our homegrown poets, Mrs. Kishma Liebert Isaac and Mr. Sanjay Keynes. Sandra, over to you.
Welcome to Let's Dig In, Ms. Isaac. It's a distinct pleasure having you in our studio today.
Thank you so very kindly for having me.
Mrs. Isaac Liebert, your new book, Screaming for Your Touch, is creating quite a stir. What inspired you to write a book of poems?
Well, relationship with self, others, and God is the thread that holds my book together. The more self-aware we are, the better we are able to relate to others in a helpful and healthy manner. Our existential reality, or coming to terms with our human limitations, raises the question about our source of origin. We are compelled to ask whose we are and where did we come from. We just did not show up in a vacuum. This imposes on us a sense of reason for being or our purpose in life, hence our craving to know God and to discover our sense of destiny. This is the philosophy behind the book. That is why there are so many themes that my poems explore and illustrate about knowing the self, impacting the world by relating to others, and having an intimate relationship with God. As a teacher or educator, I am always passionate about developing myself and students as lifelong learners. That is a must. I always seek to be more alert to my changing and growing self, always trying to understand what is important to my students and how my time in the classroom teaches them values for life beyond subject areas, and whether I am reflecting God's light to them by my example of love and discipline, fairness and caring, support and inspiration. My students and I live by our class motto, This is how, and our class motto is basically based on excellence. So this is how I apply the implicit and explicit core ideas of my book to teaching.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you share one of your poems with us?
Well, it is befitting that I share my poem entitled Teachers. As mind shapers and conscience informants, teachers are models of love, joy, and courage. They impart resilience and caring, packaged as knowledge and insight. No one else can touch a child's eternity as those who create the space for children to answer their calling in life. Teachers help us to find our sanctuaries of service to the world, faced with imposing challenges in and outside the classroom. Teachers inspire us to be the best version of ourselves. They show us how to learn so that we can live wisely. They train us how to hold solid values so our minds can rediscover powerful outlooks. They identify students' needs, hopes, gaps, and deficits to direct their hearts to the ideals of heaven. Teaching is an extraordinary profession that allows for confession, reflection, redirection, testimony, and prayer. Teaching is a superpower.
Yes, it is.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Isaac, for stopping by our studio. We look forward to hearing so much more from you in the future.
You are most welcome.
Okay. Over to you, Ms. Morton.
Mr. Sandra Keynes, you also. Yes, Mr. Keynes, you also have written a book about poetry. Can you share one of your poems with us?
Okay, I most certainly will. I will share one that I wrote while I was having breakfast at Mariam, because realizing that this book of poems would eventually make it, all over the world, I thought, what if I could be the one who inspired and influenced persons to come to my homeland, having not even heard about the word St. Kitts. This poem is called Come to My Homeland. That night, located in historic Bastille, there I was raised. Memories of an average childhood, both God and parents praise. Permit me to paint an image with a poetic brush. SKN exotic, vintage, compared to big city rush. Even here, politics and religion, deep roots. Generation to generation, seeking to uncover truths. A peculiar people, unique in many ways. Relax, while on the scenic railway or tour the island, you will be amazed. Projects not yet conceived to be facilitated by former sugar lands. Ready to invest? Do so as your pocket demands. Off to the southeast, you will find Christoph Harbor and scenery divine. Hotels, beaches, residential homes of every kind. Let's stop for a Marriott breakfast. Don't be late. Buffet style, local delicacies galore. Take another plate. Is there such a thing as poetic cheating? Hope I am not overly inspired here now eating. Through a large window, I see birds playing, a pale blue sky and coconut trees swaying. The breeze from the Atlantic Ocean will blow away your gloom. I am looking at an empty chair. Book a room. Travel back to the historic rich town by taxi or freeway. Stop beyond the Newtown shoreline, Port Zante, duty-free shopping thrill. Be prepared to fill both your face and suitcase. Yes, food again. And with arts and crafts, Amino Craft Market is the place. One vendor in particular is sure to reignite life spark when you see what he has made, Craftsman Mark. So much to see, so little time in the day. And you have not explored Brimstone Hill or the sister island, Steak. I may have a way with words, but you must understand it is a simple plea, though creatively, come to my homeland.
Mr. Keynes, in my opinion, that poem was a descriptive narrative poem. Can you tell us why you like that type of poem?
Well, as Mr. Pension mentioned, it puts you in the position that you feel you have the responsibility and the imagination to take what you have perceived to persons. And in this case, it could have been someone who may not have even heard of St. Kitts. And so I wanted, by them reading the poem, to, they get a feel as if, they could be there or they want to book and get there the next day.
With that book, how would you want the readers to use that poem?
Well, the name of the book is Life's Questions. It was written at a time when I was questioning a lot of stuff. And I would like readers who may have questions in certain areas of their life to read it. And it won't give all the answers, but it would at least give a sense of where to go and who to go to the answers. We know the ultimate person is God.
Thank you, Mr. Keynes, for stopping by in our studio to share your love for poetry, and we appreciate what you did.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Pemberton, we have just heard two wonderful poems. What are your views on those poems?
I think they were quite a treat. And I love to tell my students that I see both of them using the Titi approach. They handle their theme very well, and I was fascinated by the techniques that they also use to share that particular idea.
Okay, so then can we get a comparative view of the poems in terms of tone, mood, structure?
Okay, in terms of tone, that is the attitude towards the subject. We noticed that both poets were really celebrating something. Miss Isaac celebrated teachers and by extension teaching. Mr. Keynes celebrated the country. And there was a lot of, they were both confident in terms of tone and celebratory. In terms of mood, there was a lot of joy, excitement in the way they presented the country and also the teachers. Right. Now you asked about, what's the last one?
Structure.
The structure. Now interestingly enough, I did not see Mr. Keynes's work, but structure is loosely used with form sometimes. The structure has to do with the growth or development of ideas. We sometimes call that organic structure, how those ideas are developed. Sometimes we refer to it as mechanic, what it looks like. So in terms of Keynes, he began by describing the country and move towards inviting you back to that country. Now, Mrs. Isaac, on the other hand, spoke about all of the different qualities, the various things that the teachers do, and then she ended on a note. She said that teaching is a superpower. What I noticed about her, instead of just moving from those descriptive details into a general statement, I had a chance to look at her poem briefly. And I noticed that she had some 3-line stanzas, 4-line stanzas, and a single stanza. And I said, wow, she just didn't only want to move me along with the ideas, but the changes in stanza with lines contracting and expanding, indenting and extending. She was saying that teachers are full of creativity. Right. They are flexible. And I love that very much. No wonder they are a superpower.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pemberton, for your insights. And ladies and gentlemen, I am learning a lot. I now take you back over to Mrs. Morton.
Our next guest is Miss Heather Ashford. And when she comes, I am proud to say I am one of her former students. So I have continued with
Yes, you guys are really dating me, but that's okay. I'm proud of every single day I've spent on this earth. Is it okay? Okay. So, I'm going to read a poem that is in my book, Home Home, which some of you may have seen on shelves around town. It's not a new book, unfortunately. I should have had a new book by now, but this is came out in 2016. So the poem I'm going to read, which I have copied and made larger, you know, what I said about age, yeah, okay. It's called A Tropical Issue. And I guess I will say later that this poem is a sestina, but just think about that for a minute. You will hear some lines repeated, some words repeated throughout the poem. And my challenge to you is to see which of those words are the ones that are repeated. So what it is that for the first stanza you have 6 lines in all the stanzas. Well, 6 stanzas. You have 6 lines, and there are words at the end of each line which are repeated throughout as end words throughout the poem, throughout the other stanzas. Okay? So don't worry if you don't get it, it's okay. That wouldn't be your fault, it probably would be mine, but you know. A tropical issue. On a great estate lies a rickety shack. Broken shutters whipped by fierce rain. Water gathers at the feet of a mother. She walks to sleep a 2-month-old child who, tossing her bottle, screams for more milk. No way to get food on this stormy night. Baby is crying deep into the night. Wind blusters through holes in the shack. Breasts pressed hard can yield no more milk. What moisture exists is in tears and in rain. She whispers a song to comfort the child, but hunger pangs drown out soft coos of mother. The family loved the first child born to this mother, a son, brown like his father, with eyes black as night. They all lived in the main house uphill from the shack, but boyfriend frowned when he saw his girl child. The grandmother snarled and began to rain down insults. This one not his, so white like milk. They took back the clothes and baby's dried milk. Leave this house now, they barked at the mother. The afternoon sky was snorting, threatening rain. She packed what she could and walked into the night. With nowhere else to go, she entered the shack with a bag in one hand in the other, the child. The young woman sighs, brow pale as her child. She's thinking of how she could get her some milk. Outside, the storm rages. They can't leave the shack. She thinks deeply with the heart of a mother. Lightning flashes and lights up the night. She's holding a cup out into the rain. She rinses the cup, then fills it with rain, mashes leftover yam, then feeds the child, who gulps from her bottle on that gloomy night and rests stomach happy with yam water milk. Sleep, mama baby, sleep, sings the mother. Tomorrow I make nice home for you in this shack. So on this dark night, a baby gets yam milk. Noise from the rain does not wake the child, asleep on her mother all night in the shack. Thank you. Before you ask me, I really do have this poem. I haven't read it in a long time. I don't know if I've even read it since the book has been made. I probably read it in workshops and such. But this story was given to me. This is a real story that was given to me by someone. When I was living home and teaching at the college, I got sick and went to the hospital. And a young woman there just took to me and, was very nice to me. And we talked. I had known her long before in another school, but I hadn't taught her. But she told me this story, and it really sat with me. This story had to be told because she told it to me. I had to put it in some form. So I wrote about 3 or 4 poems with the same thing. But I couldn't find a place to package it well. I hope I did. Initially, until I came into this, I went to a workshop, I think, and learned about the Sistina. And I thought, that is perfect. That is exactly what I needed, that structure, that repetition, that way that the story could develop and recycle, and that I needed to tell the story. So here it is. Thank you for listening.
Could you tell us what sparked your love for poetry?
Oh my gosh. The earliest I can think is that, first of all, I had a father who that was his thing for us. Just give us books and poems and read poems and would recite poems for no reason. So there was something about his voice, and there was something about, I'm not talking big old Wordsworth poems. I'm talking about, how do you like to go up in a swing? Up in the air, so blue. Oh, I do think it's the pleasantest thing ever a child can do, up in the air and over the wall till I can see so wide. Rivers and trees and cattle and all over the countryside. That was, and I learned that poem when I must be, I don't know what age. It's been so long, I've forgotten. But, and see, it's lived with me all these years. Of course, I've read it to my child, I've read it to other children, and, but it's in my heart. What sparked it? That. All of that, those experiences. The Child Garden of Verses. I give one to every child I know, right? You must have that. If you give it to a child, the Child Garden, of course there are many other poems, but that was for me, all those little rhymes and stuff. I think it was, I forget was it Tennyson? So anyway, you could look it up. Can't remember that much, but I remember those little poems, and I think that's what started it. And then we had no television, as most of us who were my age didn't when we were growing up. That was a wonderful thing. We didn't realize it then. We didn't miss it. So we didn't grieve over not having it. But I realized when TV came into our lives when I was about 15, 16, that we had lost something. We had lost that camaraderie, that way children played. My sisters and I would make up poems and we'd make up stories and we'd do maths. Imagine that. For fun. So that's how we entertained ourselves. So I think that's all of that. I feel like I was born, I was delivered into poetry. And it's, I said the other day, it's like the mainstay in my life over all these years. I mean, yes, God, and to a lesser, much, much lesser degree, church and family, and then poetry, you know, or just telling of stories. They don't even have to be the great poem, you know, just the communicating of these stories that we have. And that's what I wish for us, to tell our stories. Don't wait for somebody to tell you you're a poet. Just write it, right? If you have an experience, a feeling or something, just put it in words. That's the most important thing about poetry. You start with words and, of course, images and you know, and then you revise and you fix it and you read some other poems and you try to make it the best poem that you could write or the best piece that you could write. Yes. I could go now?
Yes. Yes, your time is good. So thank you for coming by this morning, you know, today to share with us your poetry. You know, just looking at you and remembering when you were in the classroom and I was in the classroom, and I remember that poem. That poem that stuck with me all these years. When will the bell ring and
this weariness? Yes, that was the teacher's. I was probably frustrated when I said that. Like the poet was. I can't call names because I'm gonna call the wrong name. But anyway, it's great to have you here in this forum. And Dorothy was my little friend. I used to walk to Keys with her. My little buddy student, yes. I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing to be so much friends with your students, you know. Most of my friends have been students of mine at all the levels that I've taught. Anyway, thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
I was told that there are several types of poems, such as epic, sonnet, ballad, lyric. I have also gathered that knowing the difference between these types of poems actually help you in understanding poems better. So can you briefly describe at least two of these types of poems for us?
Yeah, the understanding the kind of poem really sets up expectations and prepare you before you read it. And I'll just, as you said, comment on the epic poem. It's really a long poem that tells the story of superheroes, tell of their great exploits. Like, for example, there was one that was written all the way back by Homer, the Iliad, where this figure, Odysseus, after a long, long war, took almost 10 years to get home after the 10-year war. And from that long narrative point of this hero who did such great exploits, we have the word Odyssey. So when we talk about Odyssey, it's a journey. We also have Derek Walcott's Homer. Some of you would have read it and bought it. A long, very rambling poem. So that's the epic. Very long poem, tells a story of extraordinary feat by human beings. The sonnet is one with which most students or people would be familiar. Shakespeare, you know, is the great sonneteer. He brought it to perfection. It's a 14-line poem, and because it's that short, it means that any ideas that are discussed within that frame are concentrated. And so the sonnet was generally reserved for love. So whenever people wanted to create expectations of love, they use the sonnet. But some poets reverse that tradition altogether, like Owen. He used that poem to discuss war, so that it shocks you and you never get accustomed to it because you're expecting love. So yes, understanding that kind of poem could actually express the ideas more powerfully, but more importantly, prepare you for a reader for the theme that will be discussed.
So Ms. Archibald just offered us a poem, The Tropical Woman. What type of poem was that?
Oh, that's narrative. She's really telling a real life story. What I like about it, I was reading a book the other day, and the writer said, you ought to write naked. I said, what? So I continued reading a little bit more. So I kept reading, and I discovered that the one who was taking the advice took it literally, only to discover that writing naked means bearing your emotions. Letting them see exactly how you're thinking and how you're feeling, so they could suck the reader into the experience. And when I listened to Heather on the tropical issue, which is so euphemistic, I noticed that the controversy over the second child and her leaving ended in the child falling asleep on the mother comfortably. But surrounding all that was a storm, very rich symbolism, where she described what was happening in the physical landscape as a metaphor for what's going on in the psychological experience. So we call that pathetic fallacy. So you look at the storm outside and the storm inside, and it's when you express these powerful emotions that you get other people identifying with you, because nobody is conflict-free or storm-free.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pemberton. And now back over to you, Ms. Morton.
At this time, we are now going to introduce two other poets among us, Mr. Michael Blake and Mr. Lachlan Tate. Both of them. Mr. Blake. Mr. Blake.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
You yourself are a giant in your field. The field of poetry, because you're a man of words.
Man of words.
Can you tell us what influenced you to maintain your love for poetry all these years?
Yes, whenever I get the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, I like to say that everything I am and have, I owe to Almighty God, my mother, and Joshua Obadiah Williams, principal of Bastia Boys School. It was there where I developed the love, passion for poetry, thanks to Joe Williams himself, who was just a star, a stalwart. He epitomized the very best, the greatest. I like to say, I don't think, he might not have been the best, but I put it to you, there was no one better. And that is where my love for poetry began, way back then in Bastia Boys School, and it has flourished ever since. As a matter of fact, this is my first book of poetry. Of course, I've written one or two other books of prose, but the poem I'm going to share actually is found in Musings and Reflections 1. Carry on. That's it? Of course. Actually, this is a poem. This poem is a plea to young people. We like to say that youth are the leaders of tomorrow, the future, and to a large extent, they are, since they represent continuity. If we believe that in the natural scheme of things, parents precede their children, who would come after, and they themselves will be followed by their children, our grandchildren, and so on. It's important that we prepare our stint now. Sorry, we prepare life that we're living now in a manner that enables our children to use that platform to do even better things. So this is the message to our youth. I notice there aren't many youth here, apart from the preteens from the primary schools. So I'm hoping that the young people who are listening otherwise would pay attention. Youth, you are the future, and thus you are our hope. And so, in irresponsibility, you must never, ever grow. You have within your being the wherewithal, it's true, to lead our growing nations in paths that are bright and new. Your potential, your ability are within your breast inherent, and the competency to do well lies inside you latent. Youth, you are the future. On you we must depend to ensure that our cherished values never know an end. Our history, our heritage, our culture, our custom, our legacy, our aspirations, you cannot ever abandon. You must be our standard bearers, champions of what is right, preservers of our unique traditions. You must set your aims real high. Youth, you are the future. You represent continuity. So to you is entrusted the task of perpetuating prosperity. A sense of fairness and justice must be your guiding light, imbued with a spirit of fraternity and cooperation. This excites. Compassion, tolerance, forgiveness. These values you must practice. Put an end to insolence, crime, and violence. In fact, you ought to cease all malice. Yes, the robberies and the disappearances that plague us now so much are committed far, far too often by youth who must be out of touch. The killings of our young men, our brothers, sons, and friends indicate rage, revenge, intolerance. These simply have to end. For youth to have a future, you must learn, you must live, learn, love, and care. You must stop destroying yourselves and our country. From gangs and guns, you must stay clear. Youth, you are our future. That means so very much. With positive trends and developments, you simply have to keep in touch. Read widely, study plenty, discuss and exchange the news, all the while listening to and respecting other people's views. Be au fait with what is happening around the world in science and technology, because if you do not keep fully abreast, you will not succeed sufficiently. Youth, you are the future, but with the present you must also contend, and you must be knowledgeable of your history, a truly useful blend of the ingredients that are crucial for youth to have success. And of course, if you as young people, the Creator He must bless, you must respect your elders, parents, teachers, those in authority. And then, my dear young people, you and I and all of us will be properly set for posterity. We're depending on you, young people.
I am so informed. I did not
Right?
know that. We want to thank you for sharing that poem. I think I encourage you to put it out there in the public domain. It's timely. You should get it out.
I'll try. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I now call on Mr. Laughlin Tatum.
Good morning to everyone.
I want to pose the question to you before you actually share the poem that you have. How do you think that poetry can, what poetry skill I should say you can help students to develop, young people and all, anybody? How can you help them to develop a love?
I'm of the view that one of the better places to inspire within young people a love for poetry. I think the love for poetry is innate. That's why young people like certain types of songs, because the beat, the rhythm of the song has a little bit of poetry in it, and I hear a lot of people singing a lot of these dub songs and so on. I think it's natural for us to a large extent, but I think in our homes, as mentioned by Heather Archibald just a while ago. She heard poetry was introduced to her in the home. And I don't think we have as much of that today as we did in the past. Young people don't go to Sunday school and church anymore, where they used to have Easter and harvest recitations and things of that nature. And I think these things have to come back, because they do soften us, they do help us to reflect on what we do to other people, and a whole lot of things poetry is useful for. That's it. Yes, the poem I'm going to read or present this morning is entitled 4B7. It's about a child in school experience. I don't think they have B's over the doors of the classes anymore. 4B7. They think that just because I'm in class 4B7, I am dumb. So the test comes, and all of the ink inside my pen ran out, drained out, done, all gone. And no matter how I shake it and hit it hard on the desk and on my hand, the ink won't come down. It just done. So I looked around the class to see if I could see who had a cheap $1 pen like the one my big brother gave to me. And lo and behold, a girl at a desk not far from me had one just like mine, resting on her desk, right in the middle of the test. And I took it up. Don't ask me how I got it done. I leave that to be figured out by you. But I took it up. Took my empty refill out of my pen, then put my empty refill inside her pen, then again put her full refill inside my pen, easy like that. And then I put it back. Don't ask me how I get it put back. You figure it out. You are the intelligent one. I am in 4B7. The girl tried and tried to write, scratching her book with all her might, and came to the firm conclusion that the pen could not be hers. And what a fuss! She turned her condemnation exactly right in my direction and brought into the entire fray me and she and the teacher. And I am there insisting that I did not steal no pen. I knew for sure that I did not steal no pen. But the teacher not going to understand, because I in 4B7. And I sat there in my intelligent heaven, for I was now the smartest boy in the whole of 4B7. My mind is just as sharp as yours for things that I'm interested in. Don't write me off. Don't shut me out. Just try to bring me in. I can't do maths and geography. You still owe me serious thought. That I'm in 4B7 is not totally my fault.
We appreciated what you shared.
Thank you.
Thank you. We want a little bit more, but because of time, we have to conclude. Yes, thank you. It's over to you, Carla.
Thank you so much to Mr. Blake and Mr. Tatum. So, Mr. Pemberton, we just heard two poems from Lachlan Tatum and Mr. Blake. What do you hope that the audience will gain from these poems?
Well, one of the obvious things is that poetry is a slice of life, and life is exciting. Mr. Blake, in his poem, challenged the young to think of themselves as the makers of our future. And I love that style that he used, the dramatic monologue. And unlike Mr. Tatum's for the 7th student, I realized that the vocabulary was very elevated. Did you hear it? And poets do use words, some are simple like Ishmael's, to send the message clearly and sincerely about teachers, but because Mr. Blake wanted to raise the level of consciousness and to challenge them above which they knew. They can't understand all about the future, but you have a very high calling. He uses the appropriate vocabulary to raise that consciousness so they will grow into that sense of awareness. Mr. Tatum, on the other hand, was talking about how some students are marginalized because of this narrow method of testing, just by paper. And the tone of that was really humorously ironic. In other words, if you think that intelligence is just getting a score on paper, it's more than that. It's about using your mind to navigate difficult circumstances in life, finding solutions, and changing the environment. And that's exactly what he did, and it left them all baffled as to how his empty pen could go in a full pen. And I normally tell my students, don't go and jump to conclusion. Read the poem well. Some of them think that everything that's longer than it's wide must be an invitation to use Freudian psychology. So yes, they will walk away with the sense that poetry is life, it's exciting, you could learn a lot, and you too could express your feelings through a wise, skillful use of words.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Pemberton, for being a part of our inaugural Let's Dig In. It has been a pleasure. I have learned a lot. So thank you so much. Help me to thank Mr. Pemberton. Thank you so much. We are now entering our last segment. Mrs. Morton, I invite you to join me on this side of the table. Maybe you should come in the middle.
Yes.
Our World Poetry Day segment of Let's Dig In would not be a success if we do not cater to the men and women of tomorrow, our students. How do we get them to love, appreciate, create, and interpret this special art form? With us today is Ms. Ruth Duport, a literacy specialist from the Dr. William Connor Primary School, and she will focus on teaching poetry. Thank you so much for joining us, Ms. Duport.
It's nice to be here.
Wonderful.
I would like to thank Ms. Bedford for the offer.
So, do you think teaching poetry is important?
Yes, I think that teaching poetry is very important.
Why do you feel this way?
Well, there are two purposes why we teach poetry. And before I go any further, I can only speak for primary school because my entire career is in the primary school.
Okay.
So we teach for aesthetic purposes, which is enjoyment and relaxation and fun. And there's the efferent reason where we want students to be able to listen and report. And so from an early age as kindergarten, we begin to expose children to poetry. From that basis, children begin to develop their listening skills and their oral skills. And for those students who are in upper primary with the efferent listening, we not only focus on getting their listening skills developed, but we need to get the children to develop a rich, extensive vocabulary. And in order for them to get that type of vocabulary, poetry is one of the foundation that helps students to build that type of vocabulary. Now, reading informs writing. And if you're going to get students to write the type of pieces that we sit here and we say, and they need that coming from the poetry. They need to see the structure, the words. They need to be exposed to complex sentence, word choices, and all of those things so that they could be put into their writing. So, in a nutshell, poetry should not be excluded from the classroom.
So you said you are at the primary level.
Yes,
What
I am.
approaches do you use to teach poetry to the students?
Well, I had the opportunity to teach at the lower primary, which is kindergarten grade 1, and then between middle and upper primary. At the lower primary, I used to let the children get comfortable with the nursery rhymes because we need those rhyming words, because when you go to phonics and to get children to begin to listen and combine our chunk letter sounds together, the rhyme and rhythm from those nursery rhymes help the students to get their oral speech out properly. So also memory for memorization, because if they remember, let me go back, if I could remember Rubber Dub Tub and those kind of poetry. When you go to phonics, you're getting those sounds. You're getting, when you have to do family rhymes, you're getting those sounds out there. So sometimes we use poetry to introduce the lesson and to pull out the feature that we want to teach. And so getting the children to communicate orally, poetry is a good introductory tool to use to get students at the lower primary to begin reading and writing. For the upper level, I like to look at the figurative language, the figures of speech. Now, we're getting deeper into our thinking. We need the children to internalize what they're hearing. We need deep introspection. We need for that to come out and to go on the pages. And so we begin to expose the children to figures of speech. Let's say, for example, when we look at the poem, The Flattered Flying Fish, and the shark said, the shark to the flying fish over the phone, would you join me tonight? I'm dining alone. Now here we have personification coming in there, because a shark can't speak, a flying fish can't speak. But getting the children to understand what it is that it's really happening there. What is the theme? What's going on? What is the shark agenda? If you know what a shark is a predator and a flying fish is a prey. So in what world would a flying fish go to have dinner with a shark? Then you want the children to begin to think, well, what is going to happen at the end of this poem? What is going to happen to that flying fish? She crazy? Where is she going? And if you go through the poem, you're listening to what should I wear? And you know, she powdered her nose and she put on her things and adorned herself. And you know, and a flap of her luminous wings. And you're wondering, well, where's she going? She really know where she going to? She really know what to expect at the end. And so when you use these type of poems, you begin to get the students to explore, go beyond, let them ask questions. They question themselves, question their understanding, and push them to get out these kind of answers. And so poetry is not just for the classroom. It is to apply to real life. Let them take this type of deep thinking and introspection from the classroom into real life, because everything that is done in the classroom is for a lifelong learning. It's for real life. How do we translate for real life? And so, you know, using these figurative language helps that. When I look at the poem, The Song of the Banana Man, and yes, by God, on this big right hand, you must recognize a banana man repetition. The repetition is for emphasis. What is it that you want to emphasize? Do not discredit me. Do not discount me because you see me look old and shabby. I have a job. I am not a beggar man. My trade is as important as anybody else's. You can't eat if I don't farm the land. And so the use of repetition and emphasis there brings out the character and the job and the importance of the farmer man before you want to discredit him as a mere beggar. And so the use of repetition gets the students to begin to write from another person's perspective. When you look at the poem, Dawn is a fisherman, his harpoon of light. And you're going like, Dawn? we're done in a place in the day. And you know, the first time I heard that poem, I was totally perplexed, really confused. Our classroom teacher, she was so vexed. She was really upset. The first time I was introduced to it, I was at junior high school. And the poem came, and you know, coming from primary school, we had a lot of poems, but I think we were more on the infant level. And she there, and she, you know, we had the poem, Dawn is a Fisherman, and she said, what does this mean by his harpoon? And I am thinking, and I am bursting my brain, and I can't begin to understand, what is it that this woman really wants? And then I just opened my mouth, because I did not understand the term personification, or because you have personification and I think what is the metaphor coming in there. So I really did not understand those terms. And I said to her, well, the best I can think of it is that dawn is a fisherman, his harpoon. I said dawn is a time during the early morning, coming off of the night into daylight. And a fisherman does use a harpoon to fish. It's not asking for a fishing line, but because of maybe whatever experience I might have had with a harpoon, I remembered that. And then she said, yes, yes. She was so excited. She said, yes, yes, that's what I'm looking for. You're not thinking. And I'm like, but if she wasn't, you know, she kept probing and probing and probing. And if she didn't do that, I couldn't readily get to the answer that she was looking for. So if we expose our children at the primary level to these type of literary devices, the use of these literary devices, the effective use, their effectiveness in the writing, how they bring them, what is it that they want to showcase, what is it that the author wants to show you, the poet wants to show you, then we are going to get our children where we need them to be. So for me, that figurative language, the use of figurative language in poetry helps to put the students where I want them to be, you know, imagery. You appeal to the senses, the smell, and students must understand what does imagery mean in poetry. You know, when you are a poet cannot bring a picture of a scene, but the words that the poet uses to describe the scene, you must be able to close your eyes and visualize that scene. You know, we read books, and it says books take us around the world, but how do we get around the world? The author or the poet has to be that creative to mesh those type of words together to create the picture that they want us to see. I have traveled through Africa, all across the globe, never set foot on a plane at that time when I read those stories. But because of the technique that was used and the word choice and the sentences and the figurative language, you were able to paint a clear picture of what it is that you want the students. So if we do that, imagine the type of students. Now, teaching of poetry comes from, I'm ashamed to say, but you have to love reading. You have to love reading. I am not the poet that I saw in here, or the poets in here. I am not at that stage. I do love poetry. I read poetry. I don't have a vast knowledge of poetry, but I am a reader, an avid reader, widely read. And poetry is one of those genres that, because of the words and the way in which that they are put together, they evoke that kind of feeling and emotion. And I'm a bit dramatical too, so we have that in there. So that is what is needed as a technique for teaching poetry.
So, Miss Dupont?
Dupont? Yes.
I try to be corrected, yes. I noticed that some teachers like to read poetry. They don't lift it off of the paper. They like to read poetry. What advice would you give to them when it comes to a poem that you have to take it from off the paper? It must not be flat.
I totally agree with you. And poetry in the primary school, because we must remember that our students are at a particular level. And so we can't teach in abstract. We have to have tangible things for the students to connect with. Yes. And so to teach poetry needs props.
Yes.
Poetry, the first time I was introduced to the flattered flying fish, we had sausage cans, Vienna sausage cans, and a string pulled between the two Vienna sausage cans for the telephone. And then the teacher made a hat, and she stapled a flying fish on the top of the hat, and another hat, and a stencil of a shark on the top, and a table set because we are coming to dinner. You know, we weren't so advanced where we could have had wings and all of those nice props to bring the poem to life. But if we are going to teach poetry, we have to ensure that we bring the right props to the poem. You just can't come in and say we are doing poetry. If you're sitting down and you're going to teach poetry, you have to be careful about the poem that you select. We must select poems that are culturally relevant. Students must be able to connect to the poem. We must select poems that are in the students' experience because you need them to talk. Poetry is not about just coming to listen because you're going to question afterwards. And so you need that dialogue and you need to give them things to talk about. So they must be able to link their personal experiences to what is going on in the poem. We need to tap into the students' prior knowledge. Prior knowledge goes a long way in getting the students to begin to share, because students have a lot of things to share, you know. We do not give them the opportunity to talk. Once you burst open that dam and you give them the opportunity to talk, you can get to your next step in the lesson. And so bringing the right props, making sure we choose poems that are culturally relevant, making sure that we can tap into the students' prior knowledge and allow the students to share their experiences, then you're going to see a poetry classroom like you've never seen one before. And so it is important that we meet as colleagues and we begin to discuss how can we teach poetry in the classroom. How do we get our students to develop a love for poetry? We demonstrate how to teach these lessons because for some people, especially if I am mathematically inclined or into the sciences and I don't really have a love for these things, the thought process and all of those things that are needed to go into the planning of the lesson, they're not going to be there. They say teach poetry, this is the poem in the book and that is what I'm going to teach. And you know, when Miss Archibald started to talk about the swing, flying so high, I remember putting that poem in a swing. I drew a swing, cut out all of the edges, and I wrote the poem in the swing so that the students, when they study swing, before even reading a word, their imagination, oh teacher, swing, and so they're already aware of what a swing is. They know what to do with a swing. And so that perks and piques interest in the poem. So we have to get the students to begin to get interested in what poem we are going to share.
And the way we deliver the poem, they get the passion.
Yes.
You understand?
Recently, we had the child that read for Dr. William Connell, when we were selecting the poems. I sent, Miss Jeffords asked me for a poem and I sent her the buzzard and the bee. And she called the child and she asked the child to read the poem. And so the child read the poem. But you know, she's going to read the poem as she's just reading any other piece. So, and I said to her, do you want to hear me read it? And she said, yes. And I started off reading, what was the first verse again? Maybe let me just share 2 lines in it. I remember saying, is it that God loves you and he doesn't love me? And all the children in the class, they were busy doing their work. We were behind, you know, Ms. Jefferson and I behind with the child. And when I began to, the children stopped doing what they were doing, twist and look around. And Ms. Jefferson said, I'm not speaking to you. They said, but teacher, we want to hear. And so the tone, the enunciation, what you put into when you're reciting a poem, it must be there. The expression, it must be there. So even though I weren't speaking to the other children in the classroom, we were just dealing with a child in the back of the classroom. What they were hearing was interesting because it was different. It was very different because children have to be taught how to use and obey the punctuation marks within a written piece. And so the question mark in that poem, when it said, is it because God loves you and he doesn't love me? I mean, you know, it's irony there. It's like a rhetorical question. But you have to bring that level of emotion into what it is that you're saying so that you capture the children's interest. And I might be going ahead of myself, but it is imperative that teachers read the poem to students because you have to model the correct tone and enunciation and pronunciation and expression and the fluency that you want coming out of that piece. You just can't present a child with a poem. You have to read it for them so that they can begin to understand what it is that you want from them as you go through reading the poem.
Now, Mr. Ford, I know that planning is a major part of teaching. Is there a specific format that teachers should follow in teaching poetry?
Okay, I haven't taught on the mainstream for a while because I'm dealing with reading intervention. But when I was at mainstream and coming out of my college days and sure from Miss Grant, I can't get around Miss Warner because she taught me in high school. So, you know, I did the Grant is there still. And so poetry is like when you're teaching storytelling. And so what we do for, you know, you have our introduction, and sometimes we use inferences, prediction, even the topic of the poem or even a picture. And we begin to get the children to begin to think about what it is being presented. Sometimes you might ask them to make prediction. You might put up the topic. Let me see a poem that, like, Dear Mark. I might write the topic Dear Mark on the board. And I would, well, poem, you know, the subject is poetry. And I say, what do you think this poem is about? And so you begin to get the students to think. And all of the answers that they give, you know, you write them down and tell them, look, we're going to revisit these answers sometime in the poem as we go along to confirm or to clear up any misconceptions. And so after getting the children to make predictions, inferences, or using a picture just to pique interest in the poem, we move on. And so after we do that, you know, present the children with a poem. No, you can't present the child with a very small piece of thing and the child trying to see what it is and they can't make any connections. You either give each child an individual piece or you print it large enough so everybody can see. You, the teacher, have to read the poem first to model the correct patterns and utterances that you need. Then you allow the students to read. After the students would have read the poem, we get into questioning. Now, here is where we want to activate prior knowledge and link experiences, and we allow the children to make connections with the poem, share their personal experiences as they relate to the poem, and we discuss those answers. Again, we confirm answers, we clear up misconceptions, or we can even encourage further research into a question that they might have asked. And after we would have done that, where we bring into the students personal experiences, we then sometimes for closure or recap, we might ask the students to pick your favorite part from the poem and come and dramatize it if it lends itself to that. Or they talk about their favorite part. You probably request them to ask about their favorite part, or you allow them to dramatize. Dramatization is a tool that is needed in the classroom. And a lot of teachers, you know, probably don't make use of dramatization. But I like to publish on myself. So, of course, I am going to take off my shoes and I am going to get down there on the ground if we need to go down on the ground, if we need to dance, if we need to roll, we need to drum, we need whatever. I can't sing, but if we need to sing, I'll tell them, look, I can't sing, I talk well, but if we need to sing, we are going to do that so that we get the students holistically involved in the poem. They feel a part of it. And then for our on task, our competency task, there are a plethora of things that we can do. You can either ask the students to draw their aspect of the poem, ask them to write from the poet perspective, ask for the moral of the story, or we can do readers' theater. And readers' theater, it takes planning. Because let's say, for example, we're doing a poem like The Market Women, and at the end of the poem, the students want to, like, readers' theater is where they just take a script from the poem and they come and they read and they act it out. Now, you have to prepare. You need the basket, you need the fruits, you need the headpiece, you need the dress. Sometimes the boys just fight the girls too, you know. Fight, teacher, I want. And they put the basket on their head because, you know, it says with swinging hips and show me how you swing your hips, come down the hill. And all of those things are needed in order to bring the lesson to life. And when the students get to their task and even after maybe like, you know, you come back a following week, they remember. It is embedded on their memory because a lot of thought and planning went into how do I go about teaching this lesson. Like I said, I like to talk, I like to read, and so for me it might come naturally. For another person who is not so inclined, it might be difficult. And so in the school, we need workshops. We sit down and we have workshops, we have demo lessons to teach how to teach poetry. Teaching is not an easy job. It takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of research, and you make a lot of errors. So it's, you know, you have to make checks and balances on what you're doing to ensure that you're doing a right job, you're doing a good job. Now, like I said, for me, I can't remember so much about poem or poetry in the primary school, but for high school, between 1st to 5th form, I had good persons who exposed me to the rich literature of poetry. And so I took it from 1st form straight to 5th. The English A and the English B. It wasn't anything for me. Maths on another level, but reading and writing and those subjects, they weren't very difficult for me. They were very easy because, like I said, I was armed with the right tools. So we have to arm our teachers and students with the right tool if they are going to be successful. And if we are in the next 5-10 years, we are going to see a Miss Isaac, a Mr. Tatum, a Mr. Blake, Miss Keisha Adams. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to Mr. Pemberton, and I'm like, oh my God, he doesn't even have a paper, because I'm down there sitting down and I have no papers and I am scribbling and I am writing. And I said, oh my God, he's down there sitting down and this thing is just flowing, it's just coming out, he's just glowing, he's so excited. And he has inspired me because then I want to be like that. I don't know how many persons are inspired. When I first encountered Dr. Thomas and she was speaking, she didn't have a script in her hand, she didn't have a paper. And I said, what it is that I can possibly do to be like her? That's a question I asked myself sitting in the room. What is it that I can possibly do to be like her? And I realized that it's a lot of reading and research and practice. Like I said, I can probably teach the poetry. You know, I know some aspects of poetry. You know, I know enough to get me through to primary school. But listening to Mr. Pemberton, Lord, shame. And so I know I need to do more. I need to do further. So he has inspired me. What is it that I can do to sound like Mr. Pemberton? Because, you know, he didn't pause for thought. It's just, the words just kept flowing, and, you know, everything is just right there at his fingertip. And so this is what we want. This is what we want to see coming out of our students. It's right there at the fingertip. When I tap, it's like you're tapping on your tablet and the information is right there. That's what we want for our students, what we want to see coming out. That's the end result. So.
Okay, Miss
Duport.
Duport, yes. You see, I have so many names in my head that I tend to mix them.
Duport.
Yes, I'm sure our studio audience and our viewing audience that they have learned a lot from the insights that you know on poetry, and so we want to thank you for punctuating your busy schedule to grace us with your presence this morning, and thanks for sharing. To you, Mr. Leroy Pemberton, we want to thank you for your sterling contribution and for the flow in the language when it comes to poetry. You know, once you have this ingrained in you, it just comes natural. I mean, if you don't have it naturally, you can learn it and you still you get to the level. So take your time, you're gonna get there. So I want to thank Mr. Pemberton for his sterling contribution and for pausing to come to share with us. And today, over to you, Carla.
I want to thank also Mrs. Kishmalai Bird Isaac, Sanjay Keynes, Keisha Isaac Adams, Heather Archibald, the Seventh-day Adventist School, the Dr. William Connor Primary School, and Miss Ruth Duport, also Mr. Creighton Pension, Mr. Lachlan Tatum, and Mr. Michael Blake, all of whose presence has contributed greatly to this show. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts on poetry and for sharing your poems. So continue writing and continue sharing. In the spirit of poetry, I would also like to invite our listening and viewing audience to a spoken word extravaganza. It is being hosted by the Ministry of Entertainment, and it will be held tomorrow, Friday, April 1st, at the Square, and it begins at 4:30 p.m. It's a free event, and everyone is invited.
I will just come back in here and say thanks to everyone for coming and sharing in this moment of poetry. Poetry is something that we all love. Take some time to read poem and, take some time to even write one yourself. And let's all keep poetry alive. Yes.
It has been a pleasure being here with each and every one of you. I'm Carla Verich.
And I'm Sandra Morton. Thank you for joining us in
Let's Dig In. And now invite Laurel Burrows for the closing remarks.
Let's dig in. My task here this morning is simply to wish everyone who took part in our program a heartfelt thank you. Thanks to all those who took part. I can't help but call names, so as I go down the list, forgive me if I miss anyone. Okay? So first of all, I would like to express thanks and gratitude to the opening remarks. Thanks also to Mrs. Dorothy Warner, the Secretary General of the St. and Nevis National Commission for UNESCO. Mrs. Warner, you ably shed some light on the significance of World Poetry Day, and for this we are truly grateful. The staff and the management and staff of CDU and TRC are extremely grateful to Mr. Leroy Templeton, who really found out of expressing how important the element of poetry is. I really must say that I did learn a lot, and I'm sure all of you can say the same thing. We are not limited to the students of the St. Adventist Primary School and the Dr. William Connor Primary School for presenting the poems to yourself, and if I were the principal. For these children are really good. Aren't they? Yes, they are. They really went out of their way to make sure we really enjoy those poems. To Mr. Keynes, thank you so much for doing your literary works to us. Capital issue, I think it was. Thank you so much. To Ms. Heather Ashford, I know you could have been elsewhere, but you raised up your presence this morning, and I just want to say thank you, and I feel hope that whenever we can call on you in the future, that Mr. will bring this poem positively to that call. We certainly enjoyed hearing from you and having you here. Thank you so much. To Mrs. Adams, Keisha Isaac Adams, and Mr. Pension, they are not here. They have to leave, but I just want to express
them my heart just told. And I know that I will be getting a blessing. We were not disappointed, and I'm sure that our listening audience online can see the same. Thanks also to Mr. Turton. Mr. Turton, you really brought your words to life. Thank you so much. You shared your literary expertise with us, and like just as Miss Isaac and Mrs. Adams and the others, I really enjoyed listening to your literary expertise every time you bring them. And I must say that I wasn't expecting anything different, and I'm sure, I certainly know that you were not disappointed. To Mr. Court, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and share with us how vital culture is within the classroom. We know that it is very important to include this as part of the curriculum in ensuring that our children develop their literary and oral skills, and helping them to develop a keen sense and appreciation of poetry. We certainly highlighted how important it is to bring forth new literary devices to assist them in developing a better understanding, and to develop their questioning techniques, and to use poetry as an essential part of their daily lives. When I listen to all of you, especially Mr. Blake, Mr. Michael Blake, I realized that you can certainly use poetry to express anything in life. Any experience in life can be expressed through poetry. And I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for bringing that experience to us this morning. You certainly made our inaugural experience quite eventful one. And I'm sure that just like I am, my colleagues are certainly looking forward to a repeat next year. So once again, I say thank you. Thanks to all of you for being here. To our guests online, thank you for taking time out to view online. Now, before I go, I just want to remind you that on my immediate right to the back, there are some books that were put together by Ms. Kishma Isaac. They are entitled Screaming for Your Touch. Feel free to browse through, and you can also take the opportunity to purchase one on your own. If you go online, it's very easy to get in touch with Ms. Isaac. She's a teacher at the Clark Primary School. Right? So you can give her a call at the school if you do not have her personal information, and she certainly can assure you and ensure that you get your own copy. Also, please take one of our bookmarks that we made for you. Thank you so much.